and Dave love the headsets, and Phil, thanks for joining us. So for the debates, the moderator is going to be Evan Dornbush, CEO and co-founder of Point3 Security. He's going to moderate the debates. Evan, over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. Thanks again to Hack at the Harbor sponsors 6gen, SAIC, Booz Allen Hamilton, Cybercraft, P3F Cyber Capital Partners, and Point3 Security for making the event possible. My name is Evan Dornbush. I am the CEO of Point3 Security, and I will be the moderator for this debate. This Hack at the Harbor debate revolves around patching. Some say if you can do one thing and one thing only, that thing should be to patch, 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 and even invest in patch management solutions. Others say it's not nearly as useful as people think. Be it resolved, patching is mostly useless. Our speakers are Dave Aitel and Phil Wiley. Dave Aitel is a former NSA computer scientist, the founder of Immunity Inc., one of the top boutique penetration testing companies in the United States, and currently the CEO of Cordyceps Systems, where he focuses on leading a team doing machine learning and data science. Phil Wiley is formerly with US Bank, AT&T, Verizon, and other large organizations leading red team efforts. He is an industry-leading expert in offensive cyber training and red teaming operations. Phil hosts a regular podcast on ITSP Magazine and is currently Psycognito's Manager of Technology Evangelism and Enablement. The format for today's debate will be 5-minute opening remarks by each speaker, 10-minute cross-examination, 5-minute closing remarks, and then we'll open up the floor for votes and, if time allows, questions. So I have the official time here on my phone, which does not seem to be showing through the Zoom camera, and I've got some cheat sheets for the speakers, which also does not seem to be coming through the Zoom. And let's get started. Dave, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for having me. And I hope you'll come away from this enlightened and with a better security posture, which obviously is going to mean you agree with my side. So my name is Dave Aitel. I've been in this game for a long time, as have many of you. And currently I do machine learning, but obviously I have a security background. And I think realistically, the future means that all of us will be doing machine learning, give it enough time. And I want to start us off by saying that I want to give a TLDR, right? A little takeaway for those with short attention spans. And it is this: patching is the thoughts and prayers of information security. It makes you feel good. It makes the vendor look good. It satisfies the insurance companies that you're doing due diligence, but it's not overly useful. I'd like to say that it's mostly harmless, but it's really not. Our reliance on patching as a security tool has poisoned us. And let's get specific. Last year was fraught with VPN vulnerabilities, bugs that let attackers run code on your perimeter security devices. After you patch this device, what has changed? You felt more secure. It's doing what the vendors told you to do. It's doing what the government told you to do, especially in the face of nation-state threats. They were like, look, you've patched, you've done your part. But what else should you have done? A full reinstall, in theory, of these VPN devices, which we know none of you did, would have removed any pesky rootkits from those devices. But how do you know what secrets were stolen while the device was compromised? How do you know what passwords or keys were leaked to the attacker when they had access to that device, which I assume is what you're going with? In short, you don't. Patching that device and putting it back online gave you an extreme false sense of security. We know this is the most dangerous mindset possible in our industry. And vulnerability management in itself is an Orwellian phrase. It is by its very principle false. It has fooled us into thinking there's a window of vulnerability, and that if an attacker hasn't been able to exploit us during that window, we are okay. Look, coming from attackers, you know nothing has been further from the truth. And I want to give you an alternative. Actually responding to insecure devices and systems by literally putting them in a penalty box. You have to uninstall them and remove them from where they are in danger. What a vulnerability should tell you is that a very particular piece of software is not strong enough to be exposed. Are there any number of patches to a given PHP content management server that would let you feel that the vulnerabilities it exposes now are okay for you, for your internet-facing server, for customer data? There shouldn't be. Should you have Outlook Web Access expose the world right now after an entire year of it getting pounded? No. Do you feel safe with it just because Orange Sai is just done? He's bored with it? You shouldn't. And yet that's the message that Microsoft shareholders want you to believe, that once it's patched, it's secure again. Maddie Stone pointed out in her Project Zero blog post that 6 out of 24 zero days from 2020 were in areas related to a previous patch. In other words, patching is just alerting attackers about bad code, and it should alert you as well. The only way to win is by choosing the right platforms. Don't use PHP. Just say no. Don't use Exchange. Choose security over patching. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Dave. Phil, 5-minute opening remarks.
Well, thanks. And it's awesome to be joining you guys today. Good to see you again, Evan, and awesome to be sharing the stage with someone like Dave. That's pretty amazing. I've used his Immunity Debugger a lot during the OSCP, so pretty awesome product there. So yeah, my background is, as Evan mentioned, part of my background, the first 5 years of my 10-year offensive cybersecurity career was spent in consulting. I've also been a bug crowd ambassador, so have some knowledge of the bug bounty space. So I've seen different angles of that area. And one of the things when I was discussing this topic with Evan a while back was an experience I had during my consulting years. I'd performed a pen test. Part of the pen test was a 90-day retest following the original pen test. And usually people prioritize their vulnerabilities based on the risk rating with what they remediate first. A lot of times things that are low, even sometimes medium, don't get remediated. They focus on the critical and the high. And so this particular pen test was an external pen test, and I found this vulnerability. It was some web-based vulnerability. Trying to think now whether it was some kind of, forget exactly, some web server that's not really used so much anymore. But the interesting thing is it was a low-level finding. So 90 days, I came back to retest to check the remediation efforts, and that vulnerability was still there. And by the time I came back to retest it, someone figured out how to exploit that vulnerability, and now it was a high-level risk. If the customer hadn't had me do a retest, there's a good possibility that could have been possibly breached. Someone could have exploited that vulnerability to actually breach their enterprise. And add to that, the vulnerability was patch related. It was fixed with a patch. So that's kind of where I state there, which I don't think, in my opinion, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't just depend on patching to take care of everything. Is part of an overall program. You need to make sure that you're using firewalls, endpoint protection, even like if you're running a WAF, don't depend on your WAF to protect you from vulnerabilities, because if that fails, then whatever security you have behind that WAF is going to be exploited. So just kind of a layered approach. But I definitely think, by patching systems, you're kind of ruling out some level of attacker. So one thing is maybe even some of the best security, you may not be able to prevent a nation state attack, but the more people you're able to kind of rule out, the better. I mean, a good analogy is back to the story where the two guys are in the woods and this bear is running up, charging them. The one guy's like tying his shoes, getting ready to run, and his partner says, "Yeah, you can't outrun a bear." And he said, "No, I can outrun you." So part of this is your security being more secure than some of the others in your, on the internet, any environment, to be able to, be more secure than the others, because that kind of reduces your risk somewhat. So just making sure you're taking care of all the things in patches is part of it. Sometimes maybe you're only protecting against script kiddies, but sometimes the likelihood of you being attacked by these certain threat actors are higher. So that's just one of the things that you have to keep in mind. And just to go back and say that patches are needed, but it's also a layered approach you need to take. You just can't depend on one thing. It's just like different endpoint protection. threat actors can bypass those. And, the more money and time and effort that an attacker has, the more likely they're to be able to get in.
All right. Thank you for your opening remarks. Phil, we are now going to turn the microphone back over to Dave, who can choose to cross-examine Phil or rebut any argument any way he wants. The floor is both of yours, but the microphone is controlled by Dave. So 10 minutes, gentlemen.
All right. So I want to address a couple issues that my opponent has mentioned. The very first one I want to talk about is that it appears that vulnerability triage is broken. And I think one of the things that makes patching so useless is the sheer volume of the requirement on a large enterprise that we have to assume has almost everything under the sun. And this has made an entire career field out of vulnerability management. And that it's sort of a as if you put on your CV that you were professional at tilting at windmills. We know the job's never done, and we know that the job is done poorly, no matter how good you are at it. So my perspective would be, of course, that the job's also not that worth doing, realistically, that you should choose a new way, that we may have learned that in the complete breakfast that is made up of our security, patching and other mitigation efforts, endpoint detection was mentioned, that patching is really the orange juice in that list. Like at one point we thought it was healthy, and now we realize it's just a sugary beverage that you got fooled into drinking from marketing masters. So I will give a question to my opponent, and I will just say, if vulnerability triage is entirely broken and we know you can never get caught up, what's the point? So now it's back to you.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things I say, it's just like when you use the orange juice analogy, it's like doing everything to be healthy. It's, you're getting some vitamin C there, you're getting your exercise in. So it's just like part of an overall program. It's just, if we give up on all these things and we don't do it, then what protection do we have? And, some of these things may not be an end all be all. Maybe patch management may not be what, protects us, but I think it's just part of a necessary process, just, based on my experience and what I see, that you want to do everything you can to protect. You want to make sure that you've got firewalls in place for your applications, web apps. You want to have a web application firewall, but also, even though you have the web application firewall, you still got to make sure things are secure underneath. So I think it's part of all the layered defense that we hear so much about, that you need to do that to address those vulnerabilities.
And I guess what that brings us to another issue, which of course is that O-Days do exist.
Yes.
And the attackers that most of our enterprises are most worried about have access to them, right? So on one hand, we say that, nation state attackers have O-Day and they're very scary, but we all know that O-Days, even as a term, originated with non-nation state hackers, right? Like it originated with TISO, ADM, and all the other hacking groups of the 90s that you and I knew all too well. So I just want to ask, how would you say that patching fits into a model where attackers have access to O-Day?
Well, when you talk about attackers have O-Day, I guess it's pretty much kind of useless against O-Days. I mean, that's even like vulnerability scanning or pen testing. If you have no idea of that O-Day, then you can't test to detect it either as well. So,
and I would say that for me, if the question is what are you going to do ahead of time, reducing your attack surface is obviously what you want to do first. And attack surface can be measured in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's measured in understanding, what areas are most insecure, and sometimes it's just what's exposed. And sometimes you want to have an intelligent combination of both. And my understanding was that, in fact, you worked for a company that managed attack surfaces. And the reason for that is because we know in some cases that's the most important first step.
Yeah, I agree. That as far as, attack surface management. And, if you go back before the platforms, attack surface management is vulnerability scanning, checking for all your assets, doing OSINT to find out if there's any of your systems that are in other network blocks that you're not aware of, those sort of things. So just kind of the whole premise around external attack surface management. But yeah, definitely you need to keep those in mind. And like I said, it's just kind of a layered approach. You have to make sure you're going out looking for any of those vulnerabilities and, reoccurring vulnerability scan, pen tests, making sure that you're using, firewalls. And one of the things too, one of the things you mentioned is all these enterprises have just about everything. One of the big issues there too is the things aren't configured correctly. You take someone that throws something in, and sometimes people have products that don't even get deployed. So that's, kind of an issue too that we see there.
I think one of the things that I would just love to add to that, obviously, that I think helps my cause is that people assume that the internal surface is drastically different from the external surface. And I know we have a whole section coming on after this about zero trust. But the very ideas of zero trust are that, in theory, you need to mitigate from people having access to the internal surface. So in my original example, you have a PHP content management server of some kind that's very vulnerable, as we know all PHP content management servers are. And on one hand, an external, exposure scan would tell you, oh, maybe we should move that internally. So only internal people could access it. But we know that the attackers also have access to a large enough internal surface as well, right? So we know that their internal, at some point, they're going to have access to an IP address or an account that's internal as well, which would imply that you can't have it exposed internally either, right? So that's where zero trust comes into it, where you're trying to reduce your internal attack surface as much as possible to particular identities. And I would just say that, like, even in that case, where the risk is lower, ostensibly, I wouldn't say that patching that PHP content management server is the answer. Like, I don't think there's a particular safe window of time that you get internally that you're not going to get externally. Like, in so much as hackers are able to turn around attacks very quickly, sometimes within 5 to 10 minutes after a vulnerability comes out. You're starting to see attacks, you're starting to see scans on the internet. So I would say that if there's no safe space, either internally or externally, then I don't know that patching is your most important priority. I think mitigation via triage of insecure products should be the most important thing. And by that measure, if something's getting patched a lot, you shouldn't have it. Like, that's just the reality. It's too expensive to maintain. So unfortunately, I'm going to leave it with you to maybe ask you I'm going to ask you one more quick question. I think I have another 4 minutes. So I'm going to ask you another quick question. And I actually have 2 minutes. This gives you like 60 seconds. It's going to be a 60-second flash question here, which is, are WAFs a bad idea?
No, I don't think they're a bad idea. I do think that you need to make sure you're doing whatever behind the scenes, make sure things are configured securely, because if the WAF fails, then someone's able to get in. I don't think they're a bad thing, but we need to account for the security of those endpoints, and not just depend on the WAF. Just like, it's just like, you can't depend on everything. You just have to take that layered approach. You have to make sure you're using WAFs, other devices using firewalls, network segmentation, as you kind of mentioned, keeping, controlling access to those devices. But I think WAFs are important to have. I mean, it's just like, even though, you have a really good point about not patching, I really think that the overall picture, it needs to be something part of the overall program.
All right.
And I think WAF was the same.
We're going to have to agree to disagree on that one.
Okay. Well, you're former NSA, so you know better than I do. So
no. I would say that a WAF is like patching, but even worse, right? Like,
well, I think if you depend on the WAF and just think it's out there, you're secure. And no, that's a false sense of security, like a lot of other things.
Exactly.
You have to expect that anything can be, exploited or breached depending on the level of the attacker. So that's what you really have to look at. But just, in my opinion, you just can't do nothing. And the point you had about, segmenting and make sure zero trust and that sort of thing's in place. But can't help but think that, patching is going to help. Even if something fails, then in some cases it might. And, some level of attacker patching may help against them. Maybe not all attackers, but some.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. We had
Okay.
30 seconds. I think we solidified it.
All right. Catch your breath, gentlemen. Phil, when you want, you've got 10 minutes to own the floor for a little bit and ask questions of Dave or counter anything he said. Or grab it sounds like a large glass of orange juice and enjoy. All right, 10 minutes. Here you go.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to think of anything to add. I mean, Dave's got some great points. I agree, but it's just I just can't agree with not patching it all. I mean, I understand, and he's got good points, and they're very valid, and I understand what he says, but just based on my past experience working in IT and other areas, be able to having to patch against those things and how much it can affect the company, it's just kind of hard to totally give up on the patching thing. But so yeah, it's really kind of hard to.
I just want to point out,
Yeah.
orange juice is not good for you. It's
Yeah,
real
really it's
bad.
not.
It's like
Yeah.
a soda.
Yeah, it's sugar, it's fructose. Yeah.
I live in Florida, and I know the Florida growers would be like very upset with me for hearing this, but
Yeah.
orange juice is super bad for you.
Yeah.
And I also think believing what Microsoft tells you with regards to patching is super bad for you. And it's sort of unfortunate that we've fallen into this idea that we're all helpless and that only Microsoft can give us the manna from heaven that will secure our systems. When like zero patch exists and mitigations exist. So I don't want to steal your time, but it's just a thought I had about orange juice. It's not what it's all cut out to be.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a keto diet person myself, and low carb. So yeah, definitely agree with the orange juice thing. I take a lot of vitamin C each day, and it's from a supplement format, not a juice format.
And I guess from the supplements format approach, the reality is understanding there's other ways to get the nutrients you need without believing the hype can help get over some of this, nonsense. I mean, I think patching has overwhelmed our minds the same way marketing about, what drinks are healthy has overwhelmed our minds. And one of the biggest dangers in security is believing the things you hear at RSA. Like that floor has done more damage to security than anything else. And what that floor is selling you, I mean, today it's selling you zero trust, but like 20 years ago, it was selling you patch management. Like that's the message. So that's what I just want, when people vote, I just want people to remember that RSA has led us astray. That's the message.
Yeah, and just kind of just totally off topic, but not a big Microsoft fan myself. And to kind of give a little background to that, in my sysadmin days, I started out as a Novell NetWare system administrator. It was back before Windows, before Microsoft had their own directory services and all that. Back when Microsoft used to, like Windows NT 4.0 server was insecure by default. You had to add security to it. Now, years later, I think when Windows 2000 server came out, that they kind of made it, the intent was for it to be secure, and you loosen up, open what ports, and allow what services to run, opposed to everything being open to begin with. So that's kind of where I kind of started. But yeah, I kind of see a lot of their products as kind of a big security risk.
But you remember then the difference between IS6, which had almost everything turned off by default.
Yeah.
And IS5, which had everything turned on by default.
Yep.
And it was like night and day. I mean, even now, I don't think there's been more than 5 serious vulnerabilities in IS for the past 10 years, possibly, right? The difference is obscene, really.
Yeah.
I mean, we give Microsoft credit when they deserve it, and we give them crap when they deserve that too, because that's what we can do.
Yeah. They did deal with a lot of crap for a lot of years too. So
they did, and they handled it with attack surface management, not with better patching.
Yeah,
I guess is
it's a good point.
kind of my point.
Yeah.
The other issue is, of course, open source. And we haven't really talked about it that much, but you don't know who's patching the Linux kernel. The biggest contributor to the Linux kernel for the past little while has been Huawei. Huawei is under indictment from the United States for being essentially a bad actor in many ways. And I don't have a legal opinion on whether or not they're guilty, but it doesn't look good when your critical infrastructure is mostly maintained by, a team that you also have under indictment. And I would say that we've also know from the University of Minnesota paper that you can get bad patches into the Linux kernel. Like you can get intentionally malicious patches. Now, I'm not trying to say the Linux kernel team is not doing a great job, because they have a very difficult job to do. But in some cases, the patch is the root of our problem. If we look at SolarWinds, that was an update, right? Like that update came out and hit the entire infrastructure, and it did it as domain admin. So I will say that securing the patches themselves is a problem that we have not solved.
Yeah, it's a good point. And then when you consider some of the things too, when we talk mobile applications, how some of these applications are hosted for some of the Android-based devices, and no security is going on those devices. I mean, on those applications. And then you think of the bring your own device environments where people are installing those, and the company thinks it's secure because you have got this management software, the device management on there, and then someone installs some of these applications that aren't secure. So you've got that whole thing to deal with as well.
And I also, because we all deal in the government space here, I would say that the software bill of materials, while a step forward, is not necessarily, a step far forward. We still don't understand necessarily how to handle the ramifications of real software within an XML document. Essentially, we're getting a little bit of information that we didn't get before. We're not necessarily able to process it properly. So even though I know we're all very excited to bill our clients to do software bill of materials assessments, the reality is I don't know that it's going to solve our problems yet. And having that kind of uncertainty around our supply chain is still put us in a very dangerous position.
All right, Phil, there's still 3 minutes left. If you have any more questions for Dave, or you just want to let him keep running the table on you, just let me know. Aren't you a wrestler? Can't you? You guys are both wrestlers, right? Maybe we should check that. All right.
Yeah, I got nothing to add.
All right, let's move to closing arguments then, if there are any. Dave, you got 5 minutes to kind of summarize your position into a consolidated piece. Phil, then you'll have 5 minutes to consolidate your position. And then we'll open up the floor to the audience for voting. In the meantime, again, the balance of time afterwards will be, post-debate will be going towards question and answers. Our debaters have graciously given us an extra couple of moments after the debate is over. So if you have questions, fire them into the Q&A portion of the Zoom feature at the bottom of your user interface. So with that, Dave, you have 5 minutes for closing remarks.
So I just want to close with a few thoughts, one of which is in security, nothing is disconnected. Everything is connected. And in the case of patching, it's connected to geopolitical issues. It's connected to how we do software development. It's connected to how we do business management. And what we've fallen into a trap of is thinking that what we can do and what we can measure is what we should do and what we should measure. And this is a sort of pernicious problem in computer security, where we have very few metrics we can rely on, and where you think, time to patch is the one thing we do have that we can measure. But I would say we're fooling ourselves in that this is an effective security posture going forward. And having fooled ourselves is what leads us to where we are today. Hacking is rampant. 20 years ago, Phil and I were doing the same thing we're doing now. And the reason for that is that we've believed the ruse from largely security vendors, from big software vendors, right? Like make sure you're patched. That's the thing. This is blaming the victim. That's what that is. It makes it your problem, but it shouldn't be your problem. The reality is when something is vulnerable, you should be able to take it off your network. That is the only answer. And it's an unfortunately painful answer in most cases. And it's an answer that could be backed by better policy, right? We could have licensing agreements with our vendors that say, you have 3 critical vulnerabilities, we get our money back and we can replace you with a different solution, right? Like there are things we can do. And I've seen these things happen in big financials. You know, my security business used to be largely big financials, and they would write into their purchasing agreements, if you know, we buy a boutique security company to do a pen test on your equipment and you haven't fixed every critical they found within X time, we're not going to pay you. Like that is a leverage point that they had that most people don't have, but you should. Everybody should have that leverage point. That is the kind of policy we need. So I guess I want to say a few other small things. Attackers can read git commit messages. They will always be faster than your security team at patching because they're faster than the security vendors at patching. We saw this with Log4j, and we're going to see it with everything else. And SolarWinds was just the beginning. The supply chain is going to eat us alive in the next 5 to 10 years. If we think patching is the answer, we might as well just drink some orange juice, give up, go home, right? I'm not anti-oranges. I'm just saying they're not the answer. They just make you fatter and happier. Sometimes that's the way you want to be. But I think, and I'm just going to put a plug in here for my opponent's product line, I think attack surface management is pretty darn valuable. I think that's where our brains need to go. And I think that's how you rule people out. I don't think you rule people out by patching. I think you rule them out by not being vulnerable in the first place. And so with that, I will drop the mic and I will wait for the rebuttal.
All right, Phil,
Okay.
balance of time yielded back.
Okay.
You have 5 minutes, sir.
Sure. Hard to rebut everything that you say, but it's just kind of, you know, from my background, you know, my time in pen testing, knowing that a lot of the systems I exploited was because of, you know, outdated software, you know, the patch version is not being, you know, the latest version or of the software or being patched is a lot of the way in. So that I think, I mean, I just think I still think that you should be patching your systems. It should be part of your overall program. And also think too, whenever you have vulnerabilities from your penetration tests and vulnerability scans that they need to be remediated. Too many cases, companies are filing risk acceptance and not fixing those issues. Sometimes people take security as, you know, a checkbox for compliance and really not concerned with the security. And I think that needs to change. That'll help a lot there. I've seen people in the industry that were pen testers that changed roles in the industry because they were performing pen tests, remediation weren't being done. One person in particular ended up going to digital forensics and incident response because of that. He felt like what he produced there during his assignments was more value because people were actually, you know, addressing those issues as something useful, opposed to a pen test where people were ignoring the information and not remediating. So I think, you know, as we kind of discussed, WAFs, are they useful? You know, they're useless. I mean, I think everything has a place. We just need to make sure it's all in place. Put security, make sure everything's secure from this to begin with, and not just rely on endpoint protection, WAFs, or you know, just make sure, you know, you just have to look at the overall security, and that's kind of what I think.
All right. With that said, I'm assuming your mic is dropped as well, Phil.
Yeah, I tap out.
Okay. Thank you, speakers. Hey, Hack at the Harbor audience members, the matter brought before you is, be it resolved, patching is mostly useless. Please take a moment to vote for the most persuasive side of the topic. And while you're voting, again, we're opening up the floor to the audience to ask questions. There have been a lot coming in so far. I'm trying to consolidate them. Also, just as a reminder, while you're voting and formulating your questions, if you have not yet registered for the Escalate Capture the Flag tomorrow, you can do so throughout the day. The registration hyperlink is periodically being funneled into the Zoom chat. I would also like to remind you that if you purchase Escalate between now and Monday, you will get a 25% off your purchase price, no coupon needed. To join the community, head over to https://escalate.today. Okay, with the announcements out of the way, it looks like we are going to close voting in a few seconds. It looks like folks are still kind of coming through. Wow, okay. The votes are in with 56% of the vote. I agree with Phil Wiley that patching is not useless. Congratulations, Phil Wiley. And with that, yeah, audience, round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, guys. We still have a couple moments between now and the next debate. So there have been a ton of questions coming in. I'm trying to consolidate a few of them, but I think the first one that I'd like to ask that is, I think, a lot of people asking this. So let me summarize a couple people's questions into one way. Thousands of businesses have no IT department, no security budget, no security programs. In your opinion, speakers, Dave and Phil, what's realistic for them to do, especially if there's no budget at all? Like, how do they do attack surface management or patch management? Phil, why don't you go first as the winner and defending champion of the Hack at the Harbor debates?
Sure, that's when low budget, that's kind of tough. You're going to have someone. What you're going to probably have is a lot of overlap in duties. You know, a lot of smaller companies have people doing IT and security. In that case, one of the things you may just try to invest what you can in educating your employees and, you know, trying to do best with what you got. You know, having those low budgets are kind of hard to work around. But yeah, I think a lot of investing money in education, you know, cross training the people on your staff to do, you know, multiple issues. I mean, multiple roles instead of just one. You know, larger companies can specialize, but that's what you can do. Leverage like internship programs and stuff to get people in. You're giving people in the industry experience, which part of the problem with our skills gap is people getting experience. Too many times companies want a laundry list of experience, but they're not giving people a chance. So I think doing things like internships, maybe even apprenticeship programs, bring someone in for low cost to bring them in, let them work. And you know, they do the 90 days, 6 months. If they work out well, keep them. If not, then you've gave someone some experience so they can go on somewhere else to get a job in security. Just kind of rinse and repeat.
Dave, any thoughts on what people with no budget or no people should be doing to make sure that they're as secure as possible?
Use Chromebooks. It's super simple. I'm going to return to my point, which is that if you don't have money, you don't want to try to manage this stuff. And you can pretty much do everything you can do on a Windows machine, on a Chromebook, and you don't have to worry about some person installing a crypto miner on it. And you do have to buy pretty high-end Chromebooks to make people happy, because the small ones are a little bit not up to par, shall we say. But I also just want to thank everyone for listening and voting. I thought it was a great time. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. And, you know, I hope someone asked a question about WAFs, because I'm excited to answer that one too.
Not yet, but again, keep those questions coming. Next one, as more things are moving to the cloud, who is responsible for patch management? I think I'll let Dave go first, because the answer is pretty much his debate, but go for it, Dave.
I mean, I think the reality is, like, who's responsible for patch management? And it's, okay, let me give you a weird answer. I'm going to say it's the government, right? So I honestly feel like there's very few people who have enough leverage to push back on the major vendors, right? So on your Amazons, on your Microsofts, on your Googles, on your Facebooks, you know, all these giant vendors, if they decide to hide the risk of a particular vulnerability, who are you, random small or medium or even large company, going to be to push back? And so traditionally, there's only one organization that can push back and be transparent about these issues and explain it, and it's going to be the government. I would love to see a government, you know, EDR, for example. I think that'd be amazing. How many small businesses would install like CISA EDR and just be like, I don't want to pay for it. It's too expensive. We're going to install this thing, right? Like, so let's think outside the box. That's, I guess, where I would put some of the answers to these questions.
Phil, any thoughts on that?
I guess if it's hosted entirely on-prem, I mean, in the cloud, then I would say it'd be on the vendor to keep it patched. But I would say at the same time, as a consumer, you need to not just expect that they're going to take care of it. You need to kind of stay on top of it yourself.
All right, next question. Effectively, if we're talking about patching code, that implies that the code itself is bad, which implies that the development of that code may have not been optimal. So how do we ensure that developers themselves can improve their coding capabilities?
I'm going to steal that one. And I would just say, please code in the proper language. That's the only thing I've ever seen make a real difference. Like, if you're still coding in C, then obviously you're doing something wrong. And the same thing is really true in PHP. And I would also say Ruby. I would say there's like secure frameworks you can use, and there's things that have had a real patchy history, not to belabor the point. You know, and Java's had a rough time of it lately, right? Like, so I think the reality is that, you know, the deserialization vulnerabilities have eaten Java and C# alive, and you need to have a very coherent answer to that. So scale is a real problem. Both Phil and I used to do penetration testing, and a lot of times you'd go into a big company and you'd show them 10 serious cross-site scripting vulnerabilities on like a big trading app, and they would fix those 10, but there were 1,000 more that they didn't fix. And you'd come in next year and find 10 more, right? So I think the only way you handle scale like that, the only way you really handle developer education, is by making it essentially impossible to make that kind of a mistake because of the frameworks that you force the developers to use. I don't think the answer is necessarily peer programming, developer education. Penetration testing reports are the best education you can get, and most people don't even read them. So I'm going to say that, like, the same thing with like users clicking on links. I think they should all be allowed to click on whatever link they want. The reality is, I think developers should be able to write their code to however they want, and the framework should protect them.
All right, well, if Dave says everyone can click on the links, then by all means, please click on those registration links for the Capture the Flag tomorrow. And don't forget to purchase your copy of Escalade. Boom. Next question up. It looks like we've got time for a couple more. Again, consolidating a few questions, so I apologize if I just asked them if they kind of aren't directly worded the way that you posed them. But Dave, you had mentioned buy a Chromebook over a Windows laptop, and so I guess what makes a Chromebook inherently more secure than a Windows laptop, and does your opinion change if suddenly Google starts reporting a ton of vulnerabilities inside Chrome OS?
I mean, Chrome OS has had its share of vulnerabilities, to be completely honest. A lot of it's the whole paradigm they use does not depend on having a domain. I think domains are an inherently bad idea. You want to get your directory management from one of the big cloud vendors that's managing directory management, on a professional basis, and not via some random server sitting in your basement. But again, like, the bar for hacking a Chromebook is, obscenely high in terms of it does not, every time it reboots, it clears every program on it, right? So it's a system that only runs trusted code, much like an iPhone, but I can't recommend people buy iPhones because that looks really silly, right? So, I mean, Chromebooks are a different paradigm. They're a better paradigm. You should use Google Docs instead of using Word, which is obviously a bad choice. So getting outside the older ecosystems and using web apps instead for your business processes saves you a ton of money in the future in terms of security response. That'd be my answer to that.
And Phil, what do you think? Would your recommendation be to navigate towards hardware or software that newer, different paradigm, shorter vulnerability reporting lists? Like, what are your thoughts on these?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept on the Chromebooks. you know, the fact that, and I think probably making it more difficult for people to install stuff on there, but I know, you know, a lot of companies that try to make things easier to manage have gone to like Citrix and using published apps, and thin clients, kind of a similar scenario. You could kind of look at a Chromebook kind of as a thin client. But, you know, one of the things too, when he mentions, you know, just from a functionality standpoint, you know, I used to be a fan of Microsoft Office, but I've actually, over the years, you know, some of the companies I've worked for have used, you know, Google Suite, G Suite, and honestly, I really got to where I like it better than Office. So I think in one of the things too, you know, he had mentioned being more secure. One of the things we have to mention, just to kind of build upon what he said, is, you know, you have the micros and stuff, the macros in Office that you have to really worry about, that are still being leveraged by attackers through phishing emails and stuff. So.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for your time. To everyone in the audience, thank you for your questions. Thank you for voting. Thank you for attending. The next debate, Zero Trust is just a buzzword, will begin promptly at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So take a break, and we'll see you in a couple minutes. Cheers.